Hello, my name is Paul Zanazanian, and welcome to History in the Now Conversations, a podcast on history and how we use it in our everyday lives. History in the Now Conversations explores how we use history to know who we are, to know how to think and feel, and to know how to engage in our daily routines. History in the Now Conversations examines what history is, what it does, and how we can use it or even should use it in our everyday lives. Today's guest is Dean Soulellis. Dean is a gastroenterologist at the McGill University Health Center. He is a staff clinician as well as an associate professor of medicine. His primary role at the university is as a clinician educator, which has led to a focus in curriculum development for undergraduate medical students as well as internal medicine and gastroenterology residents and fellows. Dean was also program director for McGill's Gastroenterology Residency training program for 9 years and continues to play a major role in postgraduate medical education at McGill University. Dean, hello and welcome.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy that you're here today. I have so many questions to ask and I don't know where to start. But maybe the first place to start would be asking you to tell us, what is gastroenterology?
Okay, so it's a field of medicine. It's a subspecialty in medicine, specifically internal medicine. And it's the study of the digestive system. And that includes everything from esophagus, stomach, liver, pancreas, small bowel, colon, and all of the sort of diseases that encompasses. So the diagnosis and the therapy of those diseases, in a nutshell.
So that's very niche in a way. And so I'm very curious to learn more about why you decided to get into the line of work that you do right now. What led you? What was your story?
So when you study medicine as an undergraduate medical student, you sort of have to start differentiating your trajectory. So the vast majority of medical students start deciding early on what sort of path they want to take. And there are a bunch of rough splits at the beginning. You can break it up into medical versus surgical. So surgical would be things like general surgery, trauma, and then all of the offshoots of those like plastic surgery, urology, gynecology. So anything that involves basically cutting and opening people up. And then there are the medical subspecialties, which are more like the traditional things that people think of, like cardiology, nephrology, kidney diseases, lung specialists, gastroenterologists, intensive care unit. And then there's sort of like a third box, which is things that don't quite sort of fit either one of those two divisions. So, radiology, pathology, so the study of actual samples that are taken, it's its own subspecialty. Ophthalmology, it's not that they're fringe specialties, it's just that they're specialties that don't typically resonate with a young trainee until after you've sort of been around the block a few times and you've made a few decisions about how you want your career to unfold. So the thing about gastroenterology is it is a subspecialty out of internal medicine. And although it's a fun subspecialty because you get a broad variety of ages, so everything from pediatric population to elderly patients get affected by gastroenterology related issues. It's also a very visual field and there's a lot of technical aspects to it, including endoscopy and therapeutic interventions and things like that. So it really does sort of satisfy a lot of people's needs to both be intrigued or entertained by the more esoteric or theoretical part of the medical side of things, as well as the more executive or technical part of things as well. So it's a really nice sort of marriage between the two disparate sort of philosophies in medical practice. So, that's basically why I decided to go into it. There are other reasons as well. As you go through your medical training and your internal medicine residency, you have to start thinking concretely, including, am I going to have a significant patient load, and how many of these patients are going to present themselves with significant disease activity in the middle of the night, or how much of your personal life and your weekends and nights are going to be taken up by sick patients, and so on and so forth. So these things all play a role, of course,
It's really interesting. So ultimately, the joy in it would be different types of problems to solve.
Yeah, it may sound or appear to be a niche specialty, maybe to the average person on the street, but the truth is it's a huge field. It's massive. And even within gastroenterology, when you finish that subspecialty, there are at least 5 or 6 subspecializations that you can go into that take anywhere between 1 and 2 years each after you're done. And believe it or not, each subspecialist only does their niche and is probably, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, nearly incapable of treating their other subspecialty colleagues' patients. That's how specialized it ends up becoming.
Did you always want to work in medicine since a young age? Did you always want to?
Yes, I was always interested. I had a lot of varied interests as a kid growing up. I grew up in a family where, my father was an electrical engineer, so he tended to be pretty scientific, and he had a scientific orientation, both academically and in his spare time. So we would, by osmosis or simply by being in the vicinity, we would pick up a lot of this stuff growing up. And so we were exposed to a sort of rigid scientific household or approach to things in general with a significant scientific bias. So my brother wound up going into specializing in math and risk analysis and things like that. So he's highly theoretical in the math world. And my mom was a bit more on the sort of fluid artistic side of things. And she studied material science actually at Concordia. But she was a little bit more artistic than my dad. So you could make a compelling argument that going into something biological is like biology and health sciences is a little less rigid and quantifiable the same way engineering or math or physics would be. It's a little bit more like an observational science, kind of like astronomy is, or maybe like history is. In many ways, a lot of the field is based upon retrospective review and analysis, but there's a lot of room for creativity because the vast majority of medicine still is in the domain of the unknown unknowns. It's not a closed box system where you're fully aware and you're in full control of all the different variables because you've designed the system. You have to approach the field with a whole lot of undisclosed information that you have to find out and work around. So it's got that element of sort of surprise, and it's got a little bit of room for creativity. So I thought biology and sciences would be a really good field to go into. You also have to think logically growing up. I mean, it was drilled into my head from a young age that, the more practical side of things have to be thought about, like the bills aren't going to pay themselves. And, you need to make a legitimate living somehow. So medicine was a good choice, I think, overall to kind of tick all the boxes.
What is the part of your job that you like the most?
I would say the best part of the job is there is a tremendous amount of variety on the job. No 2 days within the week resemble each other. You get a really good split in terms of performing procedures. So you can perform procedures all day, which is visually extremely interesting. It's hands-on, it's technical. There's a tactile component to it. You work with your hands. And then there are other days where you go into clinic and you get to sit down and chit-chat with patients. And a lot of the clinic visits, they're not just about talking about disease, but you do get into things like people's personal lives, their families, where they're going on vacation, what they do for a living. So clinic resembles a lot like a cafe sort of experience where people come in and sit down and you chit-chat. We might spend 10 minutes talking about the disease process and sort of the updates and evolution and the test results and stuff like that, and maybe another 10 or 15 minutes chit-chatting about life and sort of, kids and life trajectory and hopes and dreams and sorrows and losses and so on. And another day might be half a day off followed by teaching at the university, which is really nice because you get young students that you get to, speak to and connect with in a lecture environment, like an amphitheater on campus. And then, there's all kinds of other stuff, including teaching residents, curriculum development, organizing examinations for them, reviewing sort of performance, which would be akin to, like the equivalent, let's say, of grading papers or pushing residents through or, modifying learning plans to make sure that their learning or their traineeship is optimized for real world performance for when they graduate. So there's a big variety of stuff that goes on, and then there's also emergency call, which we take like every couple of weeks. You'll go on call for a week. And it's a totally different experience. You come in, you have a giant team of residents and medical students, and that team is planted in the hospital, and your whole goal is to basically get sent to the emergency room, the intensive care unit. You run around, you take care of really, really exotic and high-end things that, you give opinions, you do procedures, you organize scans and things like that. There's a lot of negative stuff in there, like cancers and bleeding ulcers and people with liver failure that need transplants. So those weeks on call, they give you a really, really high wattage sort of experience where there's a lot of high drama and a lot of adrenaline. And it's a 24-hour-a-day commitment that goes on for 7 days straight, including weekends and nights. But when you come off it, it's exhilarating, it's fun, and then you're ready to go back to something that's a little bit more controlled and calm. So you get a lot of variety throughout the year. It's really an
exciting job.
It's an exciting job, and it's fun. And
you're making a difference?
Yeah, I guess you have to. Yeah, yes. If you're going to work in a hospital, I guess you have to some degree, yeah.
So you've talked about like the joys of what you do, which is the high variety. And I guess you touched a little bit on the negative of what you do, like the negatives. And that you said it's basically the cancer patients or people who don't make it. Is that the worst part of your job?
I'm going to say something that's kind of funny. Believe it or not, the thing about cancer and cancer patients is that, first of all, getting cancer in today's day and age, especially a gastrointestinal cancer, there have been major strides in terms of diagnosis, therapy, and so on, especially for a lot more of the routine cancers like colon cancer, which is extremely common. It's a very common cancer, but the evolution of therapy for colon cancer has been really impressive. The arc has been really something to that we've been proud of in the last 15 to 20 years. There are some cancers that we're still stuck sort of in first gear on that are highly fatal that we can't do very much about. There are things that we can do, but the evolution is not as spectacular for pancreatic cancer, cholangiocarcinoma, which is a type of cancer of the bile ducts of the liver or the drainage system of the liver, and advanced gastric cancer. There are a lot of stuff that's sort of pushing the envelope, but we're not by any means close to curing these things yet. But the cancer patients, it's not as bleak as it used to be. We have way more weapons in our arsenal to deal with these things. And cancer patients, when you get hit with a diagnosis like this, it's extremely sobering, and the interaction and the discussion that goes on about diagnosis and therapy tends to be very, very concrete, very sober, very factual, and everybody sort of agrees to move forward quickly and with purpose. One of the worst parts of our job is when we have a lot of patients who don't have anything organically wrong with them, but there is a significant sort of intrusion into the world of gastroenterology by external psychology. There's a lot of psychological modulation that goes on of the gastrointestinal tract. And that can wreak havoc with people's psychology and their ability to function in the real world. And of those patients, insight plays a major role, because if you lack insight, then you can wind up tormented by a lot of the things that you feel. So the problem is, like, in today's day and age where people are stressed out by, life, jobs, financial situations, politics, wars, protests, blah, 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 all that stuff, you wind up with a significant psychological perturbation at sort of on a societal level. And then these sort of physiological reflex arcs become more and more prominent on a daily level as a chronic sort of continual phenomenon. And then people think they have a gastrointestinal disease and they present to the office looking for investigations and CT scans. And we have a significant population of young people who are unable to sort of understand that a lot of this is psychology and are perpetually haunted by the idea that they're harboring a disease that needs to be discovered and treated. And a lot of them will go for decades like this, And
in reality, it's all in their minds to some extent.
Yeah, we don't like to say it's all in their minds because it implies that, a lot of the patients, they take exception to sort of that idea because, they think that's one step away from being called something negative like, oh, you're crazy or it's all in your head. It's not actually all in your head, believe it or not. It's actually all in your intestines. It's a reaction to very much the same way like your heart will palpitate and beat really quickly and forcefully if you're really scared. That doesn't mean that you have a cardiac disease, of course. It just means that your
heart rate's up.
Your heart rate's up because you're reacting to an external stressor.
So before we talk history, I just want to ask one last question.
Sure.
And I don't know if this is going to skew your answers. I don't know if this is going to give you a nice prompt to talk about history, or maybe it won't. And I don't know if it's a cliche, but a lot of your job involves being in the emergency. So you come across death.
Yes.
On a constant basis.
Yeah.
So when you talk about historical consciousness, you can think about time, our sense of being, our presence in the world, no longer being present in the world. And that must have an effect perhaps on you or on your thinking or on your philosophy of life. So the fact that you're in constant contact with death, I'm assuming you've seen dead people before.
Yes, yeah.
So how I don't think I've ever really seen a dead person. So you don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
No, I'll answer anything you ask.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is part of the variety in your job where you get to do a lot of fun things. So then do you want to share your thoughts about what it's like to be with a dead person and what its impact on your understanding of life and history and memory, or just life? Let's just talk about life and time.
When you are a medical student, and actually maybe I'll change that to when you're a resident, especially in internal medicine, I think that's the sort of period of your training where you get the peak exposure to real death. The residents are the ones who are usually called to what we call like a code blue situation, which is a cardiorespiratory arrest somewhere in the hospital. And these things happen all the time. I mean, if you think of a hospital that has 500 or 600 or 700 beds with multiple operatories that are running 24/7 and an emergency room and an intensive care unit and so on, a lot of patients that are in the hospital are really, really, really sick. A lot of them are elderly. And so death is going to happen almost on a daily basis in the hospital. A lot of those deaths are not planned. They're not expected or anticipated because these are patients that are on a palliative ward with cancer. This could be somebody who's recovering from a routine surgery and then all of a sudden, bang, they get a cardiac arrest and somebody rings the alarm and the entire code team comes running. That code team is usually staffed with internal medicine residents, maybe a surgical resident, somebody from the intensive care unit. So they come running and then you have to sort of try and reanimate the patient. You're starting from the worst possible position and the success rate is highly variable. It totally depends on what you're starting with, right? How sick the patient wants to begin with, how elderly they are, how many intercurrent diseases they have, or what we call comorbidities. All of that, plays a role. In any given month at the hospital as a resident, you're going to see a whole pile of these situations appear. In July and August at the beginning of the year, you'll sometimes see this on a daily basis because people are, you have new batches of trainees coming into the hospital every July 1st, and people are very quick to ring the alarm when they're in a situation where they're not sure what's going on, as opposed to later in the year when the younger trainees are a little bit more confident and they sort of handle the situation on their own without ringing the bell all the time. So we do see we used to see a lot of death as a resident. You would come in and you would run a code, as they say, or sort of try and reanimate somebody. And most of the time, as you can imagine, if your heart stops or you stop breathing, I mean, the success rate isn't really that great. So unfortunately, there was a lot of contact with the end of the reanimation effort. you wind up with, unfortunately, somebody who's just died or expired. When you come in there, you sort of attack the situation as if it is, you've got a nameless person or patient, and all you're told is, 3 seconds or 5 seconds of information about the person. By the treating team, they'll scream out something like, this patient is 72 years old, they were admitted with a pneumonia, and we just found them non-responsive. And that's all the information you get. And then away you go, sort of with an algorithmic approach to how to reanimate somebody. When it's unsuccessful and things are done, there is sort of a deflationary period that happens that can last about half an hour to an hour, where everybody sort of catches their breath, tries to analyze what just happened, tries to figure out sort of, how it went, what they could have done differently, kind of like a
debrief.
Yeah, like a debrief, or almost like a post-mortem, but not post-mortem in the true official sense, but a post-mortem in terms of what just happened. It's at that time when you have to face the family and talk to the family and explain to them that this just happened, that the sort of exercise of reanimating a nameless number or a person turns into an actual person with a family, with children, with a history, complete with all of the emotional undertones and overtones that the family will display to you. This is a wonderful person. He's not just a guy that so-and-so. This man was the patriarch of a family. He ran this business. He raised 6 wonderful kids and grandkids and so on and so forth. And really quickly, you start to learn a little bit something about the family. As this kind of goes on, at some point in your early part of your career, you're going to come across somebody that really resonates with your personal experience. At the beginning, you'll see an elderly person who might be 90 years old, and you'll say, well, okay, this is a 90-year-old. You try to rationalize things by saying, look, they're older than the average person is anyways. They had a lot of comorbidities. Maybe they're in a better place now. They were suffering and so on and so forth. But at some point, you're going to get a 40-year-old, or you're going to get a 30-year-old, or you're going to get somebody that looks like or resembles your father, or maybe your mom, or maybe your sister, brother, whatever, or a friend. And you're going to start to develop sort of some kind of an emotional, not an attachment, but a sort of congruence to the situation, and it'll start to wear away at you. The more of this you see, especially when it leads up to death, so somebody who gets diagnosed with cancer and you see their family get ripped apart, especially if it's somebody young who's got children and so on, where the maximum devastation occurs, you start to identify more and more, and then one of two things happen. Either what most people do is they develop a sort of immunity to it and you become numb. And then as you continue through your training, you lose the sort of frequency that with which this situation happens starts to fade away. And then when you go into a subspecialty, you're not up close and personal with this death as much as you used to be when you were a resident spending 24 hours a day in the hospital, running around treating anybody and everybody. You start to see more people in the office and more people on the hospital wards only when you're on call. So your exposure to death starts to become less and less. And then you become resensitized to it because as you get older and you develop more and more experiences in life, you start to become more empathetic or sympathetic to the people that you see. So for instance, now I'm in my late 40s and I have 2 children. If I come across a patient who, let's say, is a guy in his late 40s who also has a kid or 2 or 3 kids or whatever, it starts to hit home much, much, much more than it did when I was, let's say, 27 years old and I was single and I didn't have any kids and I sort of was just a young free spirit coasting through life. I didn't really understand the devastation that a disease like that would incur on somebody who was 48, 49 with 2 kids. Now I do. So the empathy level starts to skyrocket. And now as I'm getting older, I'm starting to get more and more emotionally disturbed by death. But the flip side to that is that I don't see it as much because most of the death that you do see up close and personal is when you're in the hospital 24/7. And that is really the domain of the trainees and the residents, much more than the staff clinicians.
What disturbs you, if I can ask?
Most of the disturbances, it's the emotional sort of contact with family members who are devastated by the situation. You can't help but empathize and feel something when you see that. It's disturbing to see family members crying and in despair over the loss that they just incurred or they're about to have. So that's a big one. The other thing is that a lot of times you can't help but mentally role play and say, that happened to this person, that could easily happen to me as well. I mean, whatever happened to this person in front of me is, they were statistically anomalously hit by a cancer or by this devastating disease. Sometimes I wonder to myself, it's an exercise that you run through your mind and you say, there's no concrete reason why this couldn't happen to me, other than that statistically it's relatively unlikely, but this could just as easily have been me. And then you think about sort of, dying, leaving behind children or family members, and then thinking, who's going to take care of this person or who's going to raise that person. And, so you run these scenarios in your head, and even though they're morbid scenarios, humans can't help but run these scenarios. It's part of your biological evolution is to run negative scenarios where you die. They call it the imp of the perverse. It's the identical biological process that runs through your head when you're driving and you think to yourself, what would happen if I took the steering wheel and I just suddenly yanked it into oncoming traffic? Or if you step on a ledge and you look down 1,000 feet on the edge of a cliff and you say, what would happen if I just suddenly jumped? These things they're not the domain of somebody who's sort of disturbed mentally or crazy. These scenarios play out in rational people's heads as an evolutionary mechanism. And what they do is they allow you to mentally think about what the consequence would be of jumping or killing yourself, reaffirming to yourself the graphic imagery of dying and saying, that is not what I want to do, so step away from the ledge and make sure you protect yourself. These are protective mechanisms, and they're well documented in the world of psychology, very well documented. So a lot of the death that we see in the hospital is sort of mimics or is a replication of the imp of the perverse. So seeing death sort of, although you can't avoid a lot of these deaths, because a lot of the death that we see is cancer related, although you can make, again, a parallel argument to that some of it is avoidable if you don't smoke and you eat well and you exercise properly and so on, but a lot of it is not. So a lot of that stuff sort of reiterates to you that you can die. We are vulnerable, and it recalibrates your thought process and tells you, what, try and extract the maximum amount of joy out of your life. Don't say no because you're tired if somebody invites you to do something. Go on that trip, take up that class and whatever, make that painting, read that book, do whatever to try and have as fulfilling life as possible, because you never know when it's going to get taken from you. So it does sort of recalibrate your sense of what is and what isn't important in life. And you do learn when you see enough of it to sort of do away with like stupid things that are inconsequential, like, worrying about, interpersonal relationship issues people are having in your circle of friends, or maybe minor financial issues, or,
You look at the bigger picture.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
So, what's the first image or idea that comes to mind when you think of history? And why do you think that image or idea comes to mind?
History. Okay. When I think history, most people think of history in the, I guess, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm not sure what goes on in the non-academic world, right? But when I think history, I would imagine that other people think the same way. They think of history as the sequence of events historically that got us here. I think most people think far back in history. They are thinking about something that either happened millennia ago or centuries ago, probably something that's really, really far removed from this time and place right now, from modernity. When I think of history, I usually think of it framed in the context of where I come from, which is Greece. Because when you're Greek, when you're born into a Greek family and when you're raised to some degree in Greece, your identity is heavily predicated upon two things, and that is the massive backlog of history, which I would divide into two major categories: ancient history, classical Greece, followed by the Ottoman Empire and rule over Greece. So those are the sort of two cornerstones of our historical viewpoints. And then you can make another argument for religion as being sort of the other counterbalance to that. That plays a major role. Religion is, I think, becoming more and more marginalized, or is becoming diminished as this decades go by, especially in this modern era. And I think it's even the quantifiable or tangible sort of metrics for religion are starting to show that, like church attendance and stuff like that. So when we think history, growing up in a Greek household, we tend to think of history from our national or ethnic identity sort of perspective more than anything else. That's the way I see it.
So when you think history, do you see like the helmet of Pericles? Do you see a map of ancient Greece? Is it like the idea of Hellas that comes to mind?
So it depends. It depends what frame of mind you're in. When you are when you're struggling for when you're reaching for relevance, or you're sort of jockeying for social position in a group of friends from various ethnic backgrounds, let's say either in the sporting world or in terms of contribution scientifically, or you're looking for ethnic bragging rights, we tend to sort of put the spotlight back on classical Greece, and we make these semi-exaggerated claims that we're largely responsible for all of the sort of pillars or tenets of Western life, that everybody is happy and gets to enjoy in this day and age. Everything from the sort of implementation of democracy to more scientific things, which more relevant in my field, like the conceptualization of the atom, or basic tenets of astronomy or trigonometry or whatever. When we're thinking about life and sort of the vector or the timeline of life, as you get older, you start to experience things like death or illness, or you lose friends or family, or negative things start to happen in life, I sort of think about, or I allow flashes of sort of the more recent historical events in Greece to sort of permeate. I don't know if it's a type of subconscious commiserating or commiseration that occurs. I don't even know if that's the right term I'm using. But that also has been ingrained into our heads. It's sort of an indoctrination that occurs in all young Greek students. I mean, when you go to school in Greece, or whether you do Greek school on a Saturday, you're taught all the basics, arithmetic and reading and writing and so on and so forth, and science and biology and this and that. But there's an enormous amount of attention that's placed upon ancient Greece. And then the Byzantine Empire and that whole thing is glossed over from the end of the reign of Alexander the Great, which is, I don't know, when was that, 300 BC or something like that, all the way to the end of the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the initiation of when the Ottomans took over Greece, which would be 1450 something like that. I can't remember my dates. That part is sort of glossed over. And then there's an incredible amount of history that gets really, really, really detailed, that talks about, 400 years of slavery in Greece, followed by the initiation of Greece's independence after that.
The Ottoman Empire is known as 400 years of slavery?
Yes, it is.
Interesting.
The point I'm trying to make is that, when you start to think about the more negative things, that sort of becomes very prevalent, and we think about those things a lot. And especially where I come from in Greece as well, because...
Which part of Greece are you from?
Well, we're from Lesvos.
The island?
Yeah, the island. Well, my dad is from there. My mom is from Peloponnese, from a small town in the northwest side. And she, there's no lack of sort of historical trauma on both sides, but much more direct on my mother's side, because, the Nazis had invaded her town as well. And her father was, this is the story as far as they were able to collect, that he was killed by by invading German forces back in 1942 or so, back when she was either in utero or right after. The story's not entirely clear. And so we have that sort of direct thing. So there was obviously you could make an argument that there's a third historical point on the trident, which would be World War II. So we have that. And then the island of Lesbos is particularly interesting because historically speaking, even though Greece was liberated from the Ottoman Empire in 18, the official date of independence is, March 25th. Like we have a day of independence, March 25th, 1821. But that's not, Lesbos was not truly liberated from Ottoman rule until 1914, at the beginning of World War I, which is sort of coincides with the end of the Balkan Wars, which is where, Greece and Serbia and I think Montenegro sort of banded together to sort of resist Ottoman rule in the Aegean and those eastern islands, at that point. Then the Brits got involved and so on and so forth. And then everything got carved up. Early 20s, there was the Treaty of Lausanne. And finally, that section of Greece was retained with Greece. And then the western coast of Turkey was given to Turkey, not without skirmishes and rebellion and fighting, which marked the Greco-Turkish Wars, which was 1917 or 18 or something like that. All of that stuff, that was 100 years ago, right? But 100 years ago, for us in Lesbos, is not that long ago, because in the 1980s, that was 80 years. No, sorry, in the 1980s, that was 60 years ago. And 60 years prior, there were loads and loads and loads of people who were giving us firsthand accounts of what was happening that were in their 80s. So when I was a kid in the 80s, old enough to have some sort of awareness, historical, social, conscious awareness, I was being told these stories directly by a lot of people in the village. And to say nothing of what happened 25 years later or 20 years later, which was the German invasion of Greece, including setting up a command post in the village that I'm from, including killing people in the village and so on and so forth. Oh yeah. So this was fresh in a lot of people's minds. So we had sort of 1 degree of separation from the people that lived it. Yeah, that plays like a huge role in sort of our identity growing up in Lesbos. It does have a dark recent history that's very hard to shake off. It's not a fun island. It's not like going to Mykonos or Santorini where, everybody's there to have a good time. The island has a historical dark cloud still hanging over it. You can feel it. You can hear it in the music. There are even unintentional visual cues and representations of that. Like, it's a volcanic island. The sand is dark. It's dark gray. Everywhere you turn, it's, anyways.
So you probably answered a part of this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways because I want to see if you can offer a different answer. You don't have to. You could just answer the way you want to answer. So the first image or idea that comes to mind when you think of history is Greece. What's your earliest memory of your connection to history? So we talked about the idea and the image, but now the earliest memory. Earlier on, you talked about the 80-year-olds in your village in Lesbos telling you stories about their life experiences, about the history of the island, and that really captivated you. But is that your earliest memory of your connection to history?
If we sort of stretch out, that perception, the definition of my perception of history, to not just Greece as a nation, but also sort of the repercussions of that on a familial level, like within my family, I would say like the nearest thing to that would be the moment I was old enough to understand sort of what the family went through as a byproduct or as a consequence of those historical events and disturbances. So, when I was maybe 4 or 5 or 6 and you start to question, where am I from, this, that, when I was 4 years old, I remember we went back to Greece for the first time. And my dad took us to the village that he was born and raised in, and we stayed at the family home, which was an old house that was built in the, I don't know when it was built, probably 1800s at some point. It was a really old house with an outhouse and all that. And we were sleeping and we were unpacking our luggages in the house, in the bedroom that he was born in. So, and there were pictures on the wall of the grandparents and then their parents. And so so you would ask, who's this, who's that? And slowly as time went by, you would get the full story out of the parents at the age of 4 or 5. Like, I was born in this house. This is where I was delivered. On the same bed that you're sleeping in is literally I was given birth to, on this bed in this room. Yeah. And then what happened next? And then my father would tell me the story about he was born in 1942 and he remembers being a kid growing up in the aftermath of the end or the conclusion of World War II, where, Greece found itself sort of with no real footing. You're coming off a German occupation, no industry, destitute, everybody was poor, starvation and other sort of diseases and afflictions and so on had basically ravaged the country. People were leaving en masse for greener pastures because there was no hope in that country at the time. So my father, along with his younger brother and his older brother, they all eventually made their way over to Canada when they were in their, I think, late teens, mid-teens. Actually, I think even early teens. So they had to get up and leave at the age of, 14, 15, 16, an age where most kids in today's era are living at home and, playing video games and getting a lift to the mall and so on. But they were packing their stuff and they were leaving for a foreign country where they don't speak the language and all that. So that whole story was told to me and impressed upon me at an age of 4, 5, or 6. And that story was not told apropos of nothing. It was contextualized by referencing sort of, I had to leave because this country was essentially not war-torn, but practically war-torn, at least socially hopeless as a result of World War II. So my first contact with history, I would say, would be filtered through the viewpoint or the life experiences of my father and mother. My mother, because of the circumstances around her village, which was occupied by the Germans and the death of her father, and my father because of having to sort of travel across the world in the aftermath of World War II.
Very interesting. So there's that experiential family connection. Could you describe a moment in time, an incident, an episode in your everyday life or even in your professional life where you had to justify the importance of using history to attain a goal, for attaining a goal or making some kind of positive change through your work? And what was your justification for using history?
Of all of the influences of history, for me specifically, that I've experienced in my life, which you can break up into all kinds of things, all sorts of different permutations, everything from ancient Greek history to sort of, we're talking about familial, experiential, historical viewpoints or views on sort of the experiential things that have occurred in the family. When you go into science, especially medicine or biology, there's a significant amount of Greek or ancient Greek influence in that. I mean, you go back historically to sort of, we're taught, or it's ingrained in us, that Hippocrates was the father of modern medicine for sort of deciding to do away with rationalizing diseases by saying the gods wanted this, or this is your punishment from the gods, this is why you were afflicted with this disease, and starting to say, okay, let's make an agreement, let's come up with scientific rational explanations for all these diseases, which led to textbooks like the Hippocratic aphorisms, where they would try to explain diseases using observational data as opposed to attributing it to sort of religious deities and things like that. By the way, just as a side note, that being said, I mean, it really was the ancient Egyptians who did this first. Imhotep was the first, probably the true father of modern medicine, because he was somebody who, way before the Greeks and way before Hippocrates, decided to come up with a medical manuscript that did away really with religious stuff and tried to sort of objectively describe what the causes of diseases were and what the real treatments were. He was very effective at that, believe it or not. The ancient Egyptians did incredible things with medicine, and I don't think they get enough credit for it. They really don't. And the advances were utterly shocking. Like, they were getting rid of urinary bladder stones, and they were operating on genitalia to fix genetic abnormalities, we're talking like millennia BC. They were doing stuff like this, It was really astonishing what they did. One of the instances where the Greeks sort of followed on the tradition as opposed to planted the flag, so to speak. But there is a significant influence in medicine because of Greece's strong sort of historical ties to not the initiation, but the continuation from the ancient Egyptians of medical rational thought and so on. So when you go into science or medicine or things like that, having that awareness of ancient Greece or classical Greece and the contributions they made, and being Greek, these things kind of all support one another, or they work almost in a synergistic way to sort of boost you or to sort of get you to feel some sense of pride in what you're doing, not just because you're doing the right thing or this is a good career choice, but you almost feel as if, this is going to sound dramatic, not like it's your birthright, because that's
fulfilling a destiny or something.
Yeah, that might be a bit, maybe over the top or egotism, but maybe along the lines of, if people 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago were able to apply scientific methodology to this and that with all of the tools that we have today, handle this and take care of it and sort of continue building upon it, because, why not? Your linear ancestors did this. You have sort of no excuse not to sort of add to the situation, so to speak. The other thing is, when you, from a historical context within the family, when you've got a parent or two parents who come over here with all of the disadvantages of in the world that you can conceive of, not speaking the language, coming to a foreign country, having to go to school from scratch, all the way down to minor inconveniences, like the weather is horrific over here. If they were able to do X, Y, and Z, there's kind of no excuse for you to replicate that. So that plays a role as well in terms of, pushing to go to school or opening a business or fulfilling some kind of a career choice where your goal is to kind of replicate and maybe add to or build upon what happened in the generation right before you. I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does to some extent. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up. So you gave a really good explanation of how your profession and your life choices connect to your first, I guess, understandings and connections and memories and images of history. Did you ever have to use this information that you shared with me with someone else to prove a certain point or to make change, some kind of positive change? Did you ever have to use history to convince people or to justify the importance of using it for making a difference, let's say?
Not in a premeditated way where I would bring this up with the intent of a long-winded lesson, let's say for a trainee or something. But there are times when people around you, whether that's friends or whether that's people that you're training, let's say students and things like that, when going gets tough and every now and then people need to be put back on the right path or they need to be sort of brought back in line, and you have to say, listen, this may look dramatic or there may be a lot of things over here, but don't forget, it could be a lot worse. We have direct ancestors and people in our families who did this and that or underwent, that situation or this situation and managed to persevere. You can do this. And, if they were able to do this, you can do this as well. Looking back at sort of historical sequence of events, especially when they're their claim to fame is sort of hardship and, and suffering, does allow you to say, I've got it good. And I can't really complain too much,
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. It can be a motivating thing. A lot of times, history, like, 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago, this was happening to that generation, and you have it so easy right now. You're in the Gilded Age, or these are going to be the golden era. This is the golden era, basically, of whatever you're going through, because you have unlimited access to information and so on and so forth. Life is really easy. You have all the creature comforts around you. Life has never been better in the world than now, right? Because of technology and because of security and all that. So that plays a role. Specifically on my job, we do bring up history from time to time. When we're talking about sort of the evolution of medicine and treatments and things like that, it really, really helps to contextualize things by saying, did you know that in the olden days, this disease was treated like this? Or up until the 1960s, they had no idea why this would happen. Or up until the 1990s, nobody was really sure. So in gastroenterology, one of the sort of common explanations is, how do people get ulcers? And people used to think ulcers were caused by stress. So if you were like a middle-aged guy in the 1940s or 50s and you came in and you were diagnosed with an ulcer, the next thing the doctor would do is, sort of in this antiquated way, would grab the family and give them a stern talking to, you guys are stressing him out. He's got a busy job. Make sure there's food on the table when he comes home. He's the man of the house. Those types of sort of sexist old school tropes. Later on, we discovered that, ulcers are caused by multiple different things, but one of the main causes in the world is a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. People didn't know this. Some people did. It was described in the 1800s, late 1800s, but nobody really could make the connection. It was
What's the bacteria called again?
It's called Helicobacter pylori.
Okay.
And the history of this bacterium is like full of dead ends, and it's littered with failed attempts to bring it to the popular consciousness. There have been probably 30 or 40 attempts to explain that this bacterium causes ulcers all through the 1900s. Most of them were shot down. So when you tell the history of some of the common things, so, we'll teach residents and students, we'll say, what are the top 2 causes of gastric ulcers? And they'll say anti-inflammatory drugs and Helicobacter pylori. And we'll say, what do you know about Helicobacter pylori? Do you know anything about it? And they'll say, it's a bacterium, it's this, it's that. And it infects 65 or 75% of the world's population. It's asymptomatic, and 1% it can cause gastric cancer. And I'll say, no, forget about all that. That's all that textbook stuff. What do you know about the bacterium? Where was it first described? How many people tried to bring this connection to light and had their careers destroyed?
That's interesting.
Do you know anything about Barry Marshall, about how the guy used to run around from conference to conference trying to get people to believe him? Did you know that we had a task force here out of McGill University that tried to discredit him? Did you know this? Did you know that? Did you know that he won the Nobel Prize? When you add that background information to the story and you add the history, all of a sudden it becomes fascinating.
So what's the point of you telling that story to your students? What's the purpose?
So there's a lot to be said about entertainment value, obviously, because medicine is, memorizing facts all day and dealing with disease gets really dry and boring, right? So if you can add some popcorn fluff to the story, first of all, it's entertaining, it's fun, it makes the day go by, and second of all, it allows it to click. But I think more importantly than that, it gives the residents and students a deep appreciation for the struggle and the suffering that other people and scientists went through to bring the process of discovering what this disease is and how to treat it to light. And it's not just, this disease is X, Y, and Z. Here it is on a platter in the form of a textbook chapter, which tells you what it is, how to diagnose it, and how to treat it. You need to understand and accept and appreciate the fact that people suffered and their entire careers were wasted or spent figuring what it was in the first place, laying the foundation so the next person come along and figure out how to diagnose it, and the next person come along and figure out how to treat it. So that chain of events has so much sort of effort, energy, sleepless nights, careers predicated upon it. You have to accept and understand how complicated it was to get to this level and appreciate sort of the sacrifices that your progenitors made to get you to this point where everything is so easy that you can just Google it and say, this is how you treat it.
So this Marshall character is a hero, and he kind of embodies the mindset that you'd want doctors to embody, which is to fight till the end and keep your mind open to different horizons to ultimately help save your fellow human.
Yeah, there is a role to play for going out on a limb and coming up with novel ideas. As you can imagine, medicine has become extraordinarily complicated in this day and age, where it's very hard to come up with groundbreaking novel ideas. The vast majority of advances are tweaking sort of existing concepts in medicine right now. Gone are the days where somebody, a bolt of lightning would hit and somebody would say, I've got this crazy novel idea out of the blue. And it would take medicine into this this seismic shift would occur where everything would suddenly pivot and change completely. Those days are kind of gone. I mean, the spread of information worldwide, the ease of which with people can collaborate and transfer info back and forth has led to a sort of symbiotic relationship where everyone is respirating at the same rate, breathing in and breathing out, and moving at the same pace. So we've turned into this like giant organic thing moving at the same speed worldwide, all the way from here to Beijing.
So why would people, why would the establishment, why would they resist? Why was Marshall a threat? Is he a threat? Or or could it lead to disinformation? And people are like, they need real solid scientific proof to say, okay.
I think when you're trained a certain way and you're taught to think a certain way, especially in the older generations of medicine where it was, I'm going to teach you the practice of medicine, the details of medicine, plus the quote unquote art of medicine, which is like how to approach and speak to patients. A lot of medicine in the 1960s and 70s was taught within sort of the framework of a mentor and a protege. So you had somebody who would teach you everything they know, like an apprentice. You would be the apprentice and you would learn everything in a verbal way and by mimicking and through experience and example and through supervision in the hospital. In the 1980s, a major shift happened in medicine where people started to say, okay, why do we do what we do? Is it because an older guy told you that this is the way it's done? Is it because they learned that from their predecessor? Is there any science behind this? Let's start testing anything and everything. And the world of evidence-based medicine came to be. And evidence-based medicine was a blessing in the sense that every single thing that we did now had to be proven that it works through rigorous scientific methodology. Evidence-based medicine is both a blessing and a curse because evidence-based medicine dictates that you can't just do anything anymore in the world of medicine. You need to prove that it works through trials and scientific evidence. You can't just do something and say, well, this is the way we're taught. So that's really nice now because everything that you do has proof behind it. That led to the death of an enormous amount of daily practices that were being sort of committed in medicine on a daily basis historically. A lot of things that we used to do are gone. They're dead. We killed them off. And we've pivoted towards things that have evidence. But the problem with it is you lose sort of the beauty of the artistic side of, well, it's not just that this works because it's scientifically proven to work, but there was a way to do it. The technique was taught to me by someone else. There was a sort of artistic bend to it, like handiwork almost, the same way like a carpenter adds like a flair to something they're building. You would say, this was my mentor who passed this down to me. That sort of mentor-mentee situation sort of died off along with it. So now when you go and you teach medicine to residents and students and you say, the best way to diagnose this, the best way to treat this is X, Y, and Z. And now they'll turn around and their immediate reaction, knee-jerk, will be like, well, what evidence is there that backs this up? Well, show me the paper and show me the randomized control trial that backs it up. So everything has become extremely calculated and formulaic. It sort of sucks the joy out of sort of teaching. So one nice thing, by the way, about framing everything in a historical context is it adds color back to the discussion. When you impart sort of the details about the disease and how to treat it and so on, if you color it with the historical context, it becomes a lot more fun, a lot more interesting. And it drags the field back into an artistic domain rather than just raw scientific numbers. And it makes it a lot more palatable and just a lot more fun on a daily basis.
So it brings in nuance, it gives perspective, and it basically tells your students to not take like the rules and regulations or like the mindsets that they use for doing their practice for granted, to not take it for granted.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. So it's interesting that those people back in the day, when they're trying to prove that ulcers were caused by bacteria, they were in a way pioneers because they were trying to promote an evidence-based approach to medicine.
Correct. They were. Ironically, they were trying to use hard data to prove a new novel concept. But they met a lot of resistance to it. And the reason why they met resistance is because when you learn something off a mentor and it's not subjected to rigorous data, so if it's passed on in an artistic way, this is the way it's always been done, so now I'm going to teach it to you and you're going to do it this way because that's how I'm teaching you, it takes on a sort of religious flavor, a religious characteristic to it, quality. And it becomes like a religion. So if somebody comes along and disproves your religion to you, I mean, your knee-jerk reaction, at least historically, this is how most people are worldwide, is you're going to rebel against it because this would be the equivalent, this is anathema. Mm-hmm. So in the 80s, evidence-based medicine basically upended the quote-unquote religious beliefs of a lot of physicians at the time. And
now it's created its own religion in a way.
Yeah, its own religion, except it's a religion it is like a religion because people adhere to it blindly, which is scientifically what you're supposed to do. Because if you want to prove something in this world,
you need data.
You have to prove it, right? You can't just say, well, I think, therefore it is the case.
But you also need creativity.
You do need creativity. And we've lost a lot of creativity. Creativity sort of is born out of and births are sort of the artistic side of things as well in medicine or in any field. Art and creativity sort of go hand in hand. One begets the other. So if all of medicine is just dry data, then nobody is thinking outside of the box. Nobody is inventing. Nobody is creating. So if you can re-inject creativity back into medicine, and the only obvious and tangible way to do that is by invoking the historical concepts that are behind what we do and how we practice today to flavor and color the disease process, then that's sort of the easiest way to do it. It's the easiest way to sort of get people's minds thinking again. So you create something artistic in addition to just the raw data.
Based on what you've said, what do you think history is? What does it serve to do if you can bring these elements together? Are they different elements? Are they completely different? Does history have different functions? Or can we bring history together and come up with like a working understanding, working definition of what history is?
I think what each person's history serves to do for that person is, I think it gives them their identity. I think not just what they've experienced personally historically, but even what their progenitors have experienced historically defines who they are and their philosophy in life or their mindset in life. A lot of sort of the behavioral patterns that I have, or I think of my brother has, are born out of the fact that we reflect upon, let's say, our national history, our cultural history, and there's no way to sort of avoid it. It's just ingrained in us, all the way down to sort of, all the way down to situations like casual situations, like, I don't know, you can imagine, let's say somebody saying, our ancestors didn't go through war and famine in this situation only for you to, sit on your ass and complain about this menial thing that's totally inconsequential. Or, you can't complain too much, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, because you have to understand that one generation ago, people were traversing the Atlantic on a ship without any idea what was about to happen next. And we use that. Like even I use that in medicine on a daily basis. Like, I get a lot of Greek patients and Italian patients that are elderly, a lot, will come to see me in the clinic. And a lot of times when that older generation gets a bad diagnosis like cancer, a lot of times I end up with like their kid, their son or daughter who's like 40 or 45 years old, who comes up to me and says, listen, I want you to do me a favor. I don't want you to tell them what their diagnosis is. I want you to tell me, because it'll kill them for them to find out they have cancer. And I'll turn around and I'll say something like, listen, I don't think that's going to kill them. First of all, they need to know, because they need to know this is about them and not about you. Second of all, to frame this appropriately so you can understand, and I don't say this out loud, but how absurd what you're saying is. You're a 45-year-old who was born and raised in Montreal in the relative lap of luxury compared to what your parents went through. Like your mom, who's 80 or 85, was born in the middle of World War II. She was born in a village, destitute. They didn't have a TV. You know, the Germans were stealing all the eggs in the morning and plucking the potatoes and leaving you guys with nothing, rationing out bread between you and the three neighbors. You may or may not have had family members murdered or killed in the war. As soon as the war ended and they were left with, you know, this barren social, cultural, economic landscape that they had to contend with, your mother, who probably didn't even know the words yes and no, packed a bag with nothing in it, no money, and crossed the ocean to come over here, landed in this place where nobody spoke, or probably almost nobody spoke her language. She had to acclimatize herself to not one, but two new languages, had to find a way to make a living, put food on the table, pay rent, buy an apartment, do this, do that, build a life from scratch, born out of the ashes of destruction, and raise you and give you a good life where you grew up in. I don't know where you grew up, what part of the city you grew up in, but you grew up well. You grew up in an apartment or a house. You had a TV. You probably woke up on Saturday morning, watched cartoons, and poured yourself Fruit Loops or cornflakes, which is a lot more than your mom did. And then you got to go to school and you were safe. You hopped on the bus, you went to school, you came home, you had an after-school snack, you went out with your friends, you probably went to a nightclub or two. Maybe you were lucky enough to fly back to Greece in the summer every second year, every third year, 4 or 5 times. And you got to play around in your parents' village, and unbeknownst to you and the tragedy that they went through, you got to go there and view it through the eyes of a tourist, which means go to the beach, go to a local cafe, have a club sandwich, have 2-3 vodka sodas at night, listen to a bit of music, have a great time with your buddies, and then, you know, go back to Montreal and go back to your cushy life. I'm pretty sure that your mom would fare way better than you would if I had to give her a cancer diagnosis. This is a woman who was built and who has the fortitude to weather this type of a diagnosis. She's been through stuff that is unimaginable to you firsthand. And you've been the recipient of all of the struggles that she's gone through. So do me a favor and please let me talk to your mom about the cancer diagnosis. So, you know.
Does it work? What do they say? They go, okay.
They usually, they usually stand down and they say, you know what, you might be right. And I'm like, the historical baptism by fire that they went through, through the trials and tribulations, are unimaginable to you. Like, you can't even transpose yourself mentally into their shoes because you have no frame of reference. So that comes up a lot. That's historically. Funny. So I'll use the recent history a lot, you know, and if you want to take it one step further, you can say, listen, your dad comes from the island of Chios or whatever. I don't know if you know this, but their parents literally went through X, Y, and Z. They literally were there to see Ottoman occupation, population exchange, murder, war crimes. You know, not everything was rosy at that time. So, and people lived firsthand to see that kind of death and destruction. So you can even go one step further backward in time to say what the generation that you are, you know, that you were born from or came from has seen unimaginable hardships. Like, they'll get through what's about to happen from a medical perspective, which is nowhere near as dramatic or as complicated as a situation where your homeland is war-torn and everybody has to pack up their stuff, including children, and start a new life somewhere else.
So based on what you've said, in a nutshell, what is history? Can you give us a working definition? If someone asked you, Dean, what's history?
History is the sequence of events that have shaped everyone leading up to you, including your own sequence of events, that defines who you think you are, your personal identity, and how you've decided or you will decide to go about facing daily life.
Good. Very interesting.
Yes.
And does history work at an individual level, or does it also work at a collective level? Are they intertwined?
So, as a non-history academic, obviously, you're going to hear you're going to get a layperson civilian answer to this,
which is what the podcast is about. So it's perfect.
My inclination, my instinct is to say that they're intertwined, and the reason why they're intertwined is because I think that your understanding of your history, forget about your personal history, but I want to talk about the history of your immediate lineage leading up to you, is shared by all the people in the community that you live around or near. There is no way to sort of extricate the historical experiences of your country or your people from who you are today. It's impossible. I really do believe that, obviously, the euphemism of misery loves company, it's euphemistic, right? But the truth is that tragedy and catastrophe does really unify people together, and it reverberates historically forever, I think, as long as the memory stays alive and is continuously taught and passed down from generation to generation. Whether you're talking about the Holocaust, or whether you're talking about the Armenian genocide, or whether you're talking about the Ottoman rule in Greece with slavery, or you're talking about slavery with African Americans in the United States, whatever situation you're talking about, at the drop of a hat, with the snap of a finger, you will instantaneously unite and gel an entire population together just by referencing the history. So it's not just on an individual level, but it works like magic across large populations instantaneously. I mean, so much so that you can take disparate people across the world, and like when two people go through an intergenerational trauma like that, they immediately connect, they immediately click. One of the issues I think we're facing is, will they continue to teach their kids all about this? And will the message be reinforced as aggressively as it was with our generation? When I went to Greek school on Saturday, it was hammered into us, sort of, what the Ottoman Empire did and the atrocities and so on and so forth. Do we impart that onto the kids? Because let's be honest, I mean, the easiest way to get the attention of a historical event is when the historical event is negative, grisly, because these are the things that are easiest to sort of propagate historically from person to person. And it does tend to unite people because people unite in horrible times, in catastrophic situations. So will it be as prominent in the future? I don't know. I have a lot of Jewish friends who, one of their primal fears is that the gravity of the Holocaust is not going to be transmitted in 2 or 3 generations, that it'll be forgotten. And one of the fears is it's already happening. I mean, happening. You have Holocaust denial. There are surveys that are done on young people that are under the age of 18, and they say, when was the Holocaust? Do you know who was involved? Who precipitated or potentiated it? And you're getting blank stares. You're getting a significant portion of that population who has no idea how to answer that. So the importance of history in defining who you are, and I think in who we are as people,
serves or works as an invisible glue.
Yeah, it's impossible to overstate. It's absolutely impossible. In fact, I would almost argue that there's no sort of greater unifying motive or motivator than the than history, especially recent catastrophic history. This is at least the way I feel, because this is how we were raised as Greeks in my generation of this age group. That might be different maybe for the younger kids. I don't know.
Very interesting. So this is a good segue into my next question. Based on what you've said, is history a good thing, or can it also be a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's really important. I think sort of failure to understand your personal history or your people's history is going to render your existence bleak, boring, and without really sort of reference. It sort of gives you the launch pad for which to move forward in life. I come from this, therefore this is who I am, this defines me. I really do believe that. I feel that. And I might be the last of a dying breed that says this. I don't know. I do know that this sort of attitude or this sort of idea is looked down upon a lot in the modern era. A lot of people are teaching their kids that it's considered poor taste, or it's considered sort of backwards or anachronistic to be nationalist, not nationalist, but to have national pride. Probably because too much national pride in certain specific circumstances brings to mind, or evokes negative ideas that people are obviously dissatisfied with, like white supremacy and things like that. People think that being too into your history, into your culture, may be bordering or getting a little too close for comfort with sort of these sort of negative ideas. I don't really know about that. I don't totally subscribe to that idea. So I think knowing your history is a good thing. Knowing your history will help you define who you are and will at least give you some sort of mental calibration in the future in terms of defining who you are and how you're going to be. That's the way I see it. It's a bad thing if you rely too much on your history, or if you victimize yourself by saying, this is what my people went through. Not only am I refusing to let it go, but I want some sort of, I don't know, societal retribution, in the sense that, let's give an example. Is the idea of the Ottoman Empire and what happened in Greece relevant today in the modern era in 2025? Yes or no, and why? The reverberations and the shockwaves are still there. It won't go away, and it's continuously taught in schools. And there is, that part of history is imparted upon the younger generations. Almost, I don't want to use the word indoctrination, but it's one step, I think, before that. And they should know their history, but it can be weaponized against an entire population, against an entire group of people. If you carry the negative points of history as baggage and you wield it at every opportunity negatively, it's obviously destructive. It's not a positive thing. History has to stay confined to history when it comes to forging positive relationships, I think, in the future, especially if you're going to subscribe to the concept of tribalism, where I'm Greek, I'm proud of classical Greek history, and I'm proud of this, and I understand sort of what we've went through as a culture and what we've gone through historically as a people, and I respect and I accept the catastrophe and the tragedy that Greeks went through all through the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, including the more recent World War I, World War II, but I will not allow that to color or to distort my relationship with another person from another tribe that we've historically had a problem with. And that's kind of where the issue is. History it plays a major role, but it has to be, I think, contained. Otherwise, it can rapidly spread out of control like a fire, so to speak.
Dean Soulellis, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Paul. It was really a pleasure.